Welcome, everyone. Today is Tuesday, April 5th of 2022. We are going to be doing our training. The title of the training this time is The Basics of V3 Onboarding. As always, these are conversations just like our V3 calls. If you have a question or something that you would like to comment on, please feel free to use the chat function or take yourself off of mute, and we will try to answer your questions as best we can. This session is also being recorded, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel and to our website for your, so if there's something that you wanted to review or something you wanted to share with a colleague, more than welcome to on either of those fronts. Today, the training, during our training, our hosts, Monet Iheanacho, Lauri Bradt, and Jennifer Correa are going to lead a workshop that will provide information about the processes for V3.5 onboarding. And with that, I would like to pass the time over to Lauri. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Chris. And I want to say welcome. It's great to see so many people joining us today and so many familiar names and faces on there. We're glad to have you. And as Chris shared, we are going to be focusing today. The topic is the basics of version 3.5 onboarding. And as Chris mentioned, this will be recorded and posted, so you can feel free to reference it later if you need to. And some of our objectives today, we did, if you remember, we sent out a survey and got some feedback from several of you with questions you had about the version 3.5 transition or some of the changes, or will we need new DEM files? And so we've tried to include answers to all of your questions in our presentation today. And if you do think of other questions, we have left a fair amount of time at the end of the presentation where we hope to have some time for Q&A and discussion, maybe for things that we did not bring up today. So do feel free to use the chat if you have a question during it, or hold your questions to the end. We have some time set aside for that at the end as well. Some of our objectives for today is we do want to discuss the purpose of the data use agreement, the DUA. We're also going to discuss the difference. You may hear us use the terms compliance testing versus onboarding, and we want to discuss the difference between those two processes. We also want to discuss kind of in detail the onboarding process for version 3.5 and what it looks like when you begin sending version 3.5 data. We also want to discuss DEM files and what would be helpful for you to do before you transition to version 3.5 in regards to DEM files and some changes there. And then finally, we'll talk about bigger picture, what has changed from version 3.4 to version 3.5 and where you can find some more detailed information and explanation about that shift and that change. I am going to pass it off next to Monet, who is our first presenter today.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I would like to invite you all to participate in the DUA process. And the DUA is actually part of the business side of onboarding. There's a technical side of onboarding and the business side. And this is just one of those pieces of the business side that I would like to remind you of so that it's not forgotten. The NEMSIS TAC actually collects data on behalf of NHTSA. We're an agent of NHTSA. And so the DUA has been updated this year for the 3.5 standard. It's available on our website. The way you would get to it from the NEMSIS homepage is to use the Using EMS Data tab, and then it says State Data Use Agreements. And if you scroll down towards the section where it talks about 3.5 data, you'll see here that the document itself is here listed as the 3.5 Data Use Agreement. It's a PDF. And then once you're complete, or if you have any questions about that DUA process, just submit them to this email address and we'll address them there. I also just wanted to let you know that it takes a little time for states to get these DUAs approved. So the sooner that you can start working on this document with your leadership team, the better I think the process will go for you. And then I'll just tell you one other thing about the DUA process. Before onboarding any actual PCR data to the TAC, we really want you to take a look at the elements that will be submitted under the 3.5 standard. Like again, I mentioned before, review this information with your state director, with your legal counsel, and just, understand the terms of this agreement. This is for the protection of not only your state participating agencies, but your state in general. And each state has a different set of laws or regulations as it relates to data use agreements and data sharing. So we just want to protect all entities involved. Feel free to reach out with any questions about the DUA process. I've seen this take as short as 5 days to as long as multiple years. So just start on this process early, and then we'll be good to go with submitting the data for 3.5 standard. Now I'll turn this time over to Jen Correa.
Good morning. So the first thing I want to talk about is onboarding versus compliance testing. Compliance testing is the process that your vendors go through, and the field level vendors, EPCR vendors, they go through the collect and send compliance process. And then your state level EPCR systems go through the receive and process compliance process. So they are different. There's different testing that happens, and the compliance testing must be complete from the state receive and process vendor prior to being able to onboard. So you want to make sure that they've done that and that they are listed on the NEMSIS website as a 3.5 approved vendor. On the next slide, it just touches base kind of on that you have to have the compliance testing done. Monet, can you move to the, thank you, sorry. That you have to have the compliance testing done prior to onboarding. The state EMS office and officials, they do not need to participate in the compliance testing process. That is strictly with the receive and process vendor, which in the slide presentation, you'll see that I abbreviated to R&P vendor just for ease of space and use. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So for version 3.5 onboarding, this is where the state actually tests and sends the data to the national database. So you already have an R&P vendor that's compliant. The state's ready to begin their transition over to version 3.5. And so you'll start the technical onboarding process. Once the technical onboarding process is done, then you'll start the production onboarding process, which is the business side of the onboarding. Go ahead and next slide. During the technical onboarding process, the state data manager will let the TAC know that your state is ready to go and request the version 3.5 credentials. We will provide those credentials to the data manager. The data manager is the person who owns those credentials. So they will provide them to the receive and process vendor. And then we will make sure that the testing URL is sent out both to the state data manager and the R&P vendor. You'll know that it is the testing onboarding site because it actually says onboard in the URL. So if you ever have a question, whether you're sending to the production server URL or whether you're sending to the onboarding testing server URL, just look for that. If it says onboard, you know that's the testing site. The receive and process vendor, the first thing they're going to do once they change their endpoint over to the testing URL is to submit a single demographic file for a single agency. And then let us know at the TAC, and you can let Monet know, you can let myself know, you can let all of us know just to make sure we all are aware to look for that DEM file on the server and make sure that it gets received. And if it is successful, then we can move to the next step. If it's not, you should have received a response from the web service about any issues within the DEM file, and then we can also help you work through those. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So once the DEM file has been successfully received, the RMP vendor then submits a EMS file, a PCR file for that demographic agency. So that's really important. If there is a kind of a background table where successfully submitted demographics are listed. So your agencies are all in there. If an agency is not in that table, the PCR files will be rejected. So that's why DEM files are so important. So for the testing process, you will submit a PCR file for that demographic agency, and then let us know, yep, it's been sent. We'll go take a look at it. That process can sometimes take 24 to 48 hours. There are times where we have to wait for the system to update to make sure that everything ran correctly. Once that is done and we've confirmed that it has been successfully sent, then the RMP vendor is provided with the production URL, and they can change the endpoint, and you can start making sure that any updated or missing DEM files are replaced. Once those DEM files are all in place, that's when you can begin submitting the PCR files. And then if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Lauri, and she's going to take you through the rest of the steps.
Jen, we did have one question from Peter Brody. He's wondering if compliance testing includes any testing of custom values or custom fields.
There are custom elements within the compliance testing. So the vendors have to, and this is at the collect and send level, right? The ones who are collecting the data in the field. They have to create custom elements. They also have to add to custom values to existing dropdowns, and they're tested on those. The receive and process folks are tested on their ability to collect and for the state, and then send national elements only to the NEMSIS TAC.
Hey, Ridgely has a question that I think I'm going to answer in the next few slides. If you can hang on to that one, Ridgely. And Peter says, thank you. All right, I'll jump in. We are going to talk some more about DEM files. I know Jen just mentioned the importance of having a DEM file that is current and submitted to us before we can receive any files from those agencies, any PCR or EMS files. And really, typically right now, one of the largest reasons we currently see files failing is because of either incomplete or missing demographic files and information. And so we just see this as a great time as you're getting ready to transition to 3.5 to make sure your DEM files are updated. And so some people have asked, is it necessary for us to redo all of our files? The answer is no. You do not need to redo your DEM files for version 3.5, but it would be helpful to kind of go through and make sure that they are current and up to date and that every agency does have a file with us. Let's see. If you need help with this, I encourage you to reach out to either your software vendor or we at the NEMSIS TAC can help you figure out how to do that if you have questions. This next slide talks about what's required in the new DEM files in the version 3.5 DEM files. And actually there's less required now than there was in version 3.4. And so because of that, you can use old DEM files. Essentially, you'll be giving us more information than we need or more than is required. But we can filter out what we need and don't need. And so you don't need to do that on your end. I think there are some states that have decided to just redo all of them and only submit what's required. If you want to do that, you can. If you want to keep your old files, they will just have extra information. There's nothing new that was added to the DEM file. So there's nothing that you need to change there. And you can look in, Jen, if you wouldn't mind posting this link in chat here, you can look in our data dictionary for specifics. If you look specifically under D agency and D configuration, you'll see that there's 22 mandatory and required national elements for the DEM files. And so more details are given there. If you could go to that next slide, Monet. If you do click on each DEM file, if you click on each element, you can get more information as is shown on this slide. You can see if it's a national element, a state element, if it's mandatory or required, if not values are permitted or not, kind of the definition of that element as well. So hopefully you are all familiar with this, but if not, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to give you a little walkthrough of our data dictionary and all the information that can be found there. If you can go to the next slide again, Monet. One question that we do get a lot is, what's the difference between mandatory and required? And essentially this is explained in detail in the data dictionary, as I mentioned, but part of that explanation I copied onto this slide here. You can see that both mandatory and required elements must be completed. The difference is that mandatory does not allow for not values and required elements does allow for not values. So both mandatory and required need to be completed. The difference has to do with not values. And then the difference between recommended and optional, neither of them need to be completed, but that's what they have in common. The difference again is that recommended does allow for not values and optional does not. If you can go to the next slide there, Monet. Another thing we wanted to mention is that we commonly see files failing if the information in the PCR does not match the information in the DEM file, specifically under D agency 01 or 02 or 04. And so that you can kind of see an example here of the blue highlights where those do not match. If this file was submitted with this DEM agency in parallel, it would fail. And so we would not be able to receive that file. So if you can make sure the information on the PCR is matching the information on the DEM file specifically for these elements, that'll help us to make sure the records are coming in clean and not failing or not being rejected. We would hate to see essentially providers go to all the work of carefully documenting this information in the field and then having it not be able to be received or submitted into our data system or not be able to be used by you in your tracking of data and information. Let's see the next slide here, updating DEMs. We are encouraging you, as I said, to go through your DEM files at this point as you are thinking about beginning the onboarding process and just see if there's anything that needs to be updated. Feel free to reach out to us or software vendors if you have any question. And just a reminder that your data is being utilized more and more. We're getting more and more requests from both state and national levels. It's being used for public health surveillance. It was used a lot for COVID tracking. Really timely data was important during that. It's being used at a national level more and more for opioid overdose tracking and naloxone tracking. We had last year in our 2021 public release data set, close to 50 million records. And we've had hundreds of researchers requesting those records to do research. So it really is being used and we appreciate your help with keeping that updated and as clean as possible. On the next slide, this is where if you're unsure, if you are missing any DEM files or if you have records failing, if you don't know where to look for that, I'd encourage you to go to the data submission dashboard. And I think Jen's going to put a link to this in the chat as well. But if you go there specifically under the EMS Agency Detail tab, you'll see a picture similar to the one I cut and pasted here. You will see information just for your state. This is a total of nationally. So within the last few weeks, there were close to 13,000 records that failed because of a missing demographic file or incomplete demographic file. And so that's where you can see if you have any missing. And I want to say thank you first. This number has come down drastically over the last year or two, as we've been really working closely with states to try to keep demographic file information up to date. We've seen this number really drop, and we want to see it continue to come down. We'd love to see it be 0 failed records for this reason. So if you can continue to help us with that, we would appreciate it. And let's see if we have any questions in the chat right now before I pass it back to Monet. Okay, Peter's asking if the state wants an option to have PNs or NVs, we need to make those custom elements and then map from the RP to the TAC. Wants an optional. Is that a question for Jen, I believe?
I believe that if you want to add attributes or PNs to the an optional field, you would have to turn it custom, but let me find out and confirm that with Josh first before we put that into stone.
Originally asked which elements are being dropped from the DEM file. I don't have that in front of me right now, but if you do look in the data dictionary, it'll outline. You can look in the version 3.4 and the version 3.5 and compare and see which ones are being dropped.
I'm actually covering that next.
Oh, Monet's going to talk about that. Thanks, Monet.
Great segue. Good
pass it off to
right. So here we are. Basically, again, we had 35 required or mandatory and required elements as part of the 3.4 standard. Now there's only 22, and they're listed in this little quick, I call it a cheat sheet, so that you can see exactly what's required. And then here are some examples of how that information can be populated. This is currently not on the website, but I'll be happy to send it to you, or we could get this posted on the website in the next couple of days, hopefully. And so what I want to show you from here is another way that you can look for this information. So one of the questions in the survey was, where's the location of what changed from 3.4 to 3.5? On the V3 Data Dictionaries tab under Technical Resources, the first section starts with the 3.5 Data Dictionary, but if you scroll a little further down on the page, you will come to the section that talks about additional resources for 3.5.0. And the very last link says version 3 summary of changes. It's an Excel document. I put the link here. And then also I'll just show you what a screenshot of that looks like. So there are several tabs on the in the document. One is all the elements, all the required elements, all the national elements, the state elements. And then there's a tab that is titled What Change or Changes. And so on this document, you can see here that the first 16 rows describe the changes to the DEM section. A lot of these are the elements that were removed from the 3.5. And the reason for removing those was that it took too much time to document. It's not needed on each PCR. And then their impact to the provider experience. So in summary, when you are ready, please reach out to the TAC and we can assist you. There may be some questions that we certainly didn't cover here today, but we're more than happy and available to answer any questions that you might have. You can reach out to Jen, Lauri, myself, and if we don't have the answers, we have a whole nother group of folks in our business intelligence department and then our IT section And then we have our statisticians. We can certainly get some answers for you about any questions that you may have. And as a reminder, we have our annual meeting coming up. I do have the registration link finally released, and I will get that posted this week. And so please look forward to more information about the annual meeting. You can submit your topics that you want covered or your questions that you want covered in any format that you choose. You can put them here in the chat. You can send them to us directly via email or in our main email box. You can call us. What we want to really communicate is that we're here for you. And so please utilize us. And let's look at the chat and see what additional questions you may have. And please feel free to come off mute and then ask your questions.
So Monet, there was one more question from Ridgely where she asked, does change means dropped? And I think that's in regards to the summary of changes.
Yeah, so let's look at that. Let's look at that spreadsheet. So the changes made. So what we have is we have a column that identifies either added, changed, renamed, or something else may have occurred with the element. So for instance, in the spreadsheet here, you'll see that deconfiguration 02 was renamed. So not all changes means that it was removed. Some elements were deprecated, some were retired and therefore essentially deprecated. But some of the changes, like for instance, deconfiguration 09, where it says EMS agency medications, the revision summary reads, added option for the use of SNOMED CT codes for blood products. So not all changes are related to things that were removed. Some things were added, some things were renamed. And then you can see another example in DPersonnel 24, where we removed the reference to the 2009 standard. So I hope that answers your question, Virtually.
And then there was another question from Ty. Are the changes sheet updated for all patches? So when we go to 351, will those changes be added to the sheet?
That's actually a good question. We're not on 351 yet. This particular spreadsheet is only related to the changes from 3.4 to the 3.50 standard. But I do imagine that we will need such a document to identify the changes from 3.50 to 3.51. And we could certainly create an additional spreadsheet that identifies those changes. They will be documented in a change log. That's our standard procedure to identify those things in a change log. But, you know, if you need the information in a more visual format, like in a spreadsheet, we can do that. We're here to help you. You know, you may have some limited staff in your office. And so if you need additional documents created, that's what we're here for. We're here to create the documents that will be more beneficial for your use in your state with your teams. So just keep reaching out to us and let us know. And then, a matter of fact, if Ty asks that question, he already knows that we have you. We got you covered.
Then there's another question from Peter asking about the meeting agenda for the annual meeting, if that is available. Some states will need that for their approval.
Absolutely, Peter. I do have a draft agenda that I have been pressing our leadership team to finalize. It will continue to change as we get closer, but at the moment, I do have a draft agenda that pretty much outlines the speakers, the times, what days, and so I can get that information sent out to you as well. I'll go ahead and make myself a note of that and get that draft agenda sent to you, okay? I got it on my to-do list. And I thank you for your patience with regard to all the information that we're trying to push out about the annual meeting.
I did put a few links into the chat One of them is for the state data submission dashboard. And then there were a couple for the data dictionaries. One will take you directly to the HTML version where you can click on the individual elements within the data dictionary. The other one takes you to the data dictionary page. So you could actually pull it up in PDF or HTML, whichever one is easiest for you.
And Monet, Judy has a question. If they have a current DUA, do they need a new one for 3.5?
Yes, ma'am. We will need a new DUA for 3.5.
Any other questions?
All right. Well, if there are no additional questions, we'll give you back your time. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Our email contacts are listed on the NEMSIS website. If you just type our first name, the information can be presented to you of how to contact us if in the event you don't have time to copy it here. Or ladies, if you want, you can go ahead and add your contact information to the chat. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I know that sometimes the meeting platforms, you may feel a little shy, but we're here for you. So just keep that always in the back of your mind that we're definitely here to help you as best we can. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks,
Monet. Ridgely did have a question about version 3.5.1 and when that may be live. I know we don't have any dates on that yet, but we have started collecting ideas of what people would like to see added and changed. Just like your cell phone software updates regularly, there will continue to be improvements and changes. So know that it'll always be improving and changing, but we do not have a release date for that yet. Anyone else? All right, thanks guys. We'll see you soon.